What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another look at sales prices for CGC graded Star Wars comics. Before I do that, though, I wanted to also share some news about CGC and some of the recent changes they've made to their grading labels. At long last, they are finally starting to recognize newsstand editions on the label. And before we dig into all that, I want to say thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys allow this channel to be what it is today. Thank you so much for allowing me to make more and better videos. All of my Patreon supporters receive links to new videos 24 hours early. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, it's patreon.com/actionfiguregrader. First, let's dig into the news over at CGC. This news was posted on their website on September 26th. And there's been more and more demand from collectors who have newsstand editions. And in the past, CGC never recognized on the label that it was a direct edition, which kind of bypassed the whole newsstand versus newsstand editions. And the only time they ever kind of showed that on the label is when the price was different on the actual comic book cover for a newsstand versus a direct, which did happen back in the past. The most notable example would be like Heir to the Empire #1. Which is the first appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn, and a book that we're going to cover here in a little while, and some recent sales prices for it. But those books, the direct and the newsstand, they have different price points on the cover. You can see right here, this Amazing Spider-Man 252 has a 60-cent price tag, and that price is the same for the direct or for the newsstand for that Spider-Man book. So that was never changed. It was never labeled as a newsstand or direct, even though it's very readily apparent when you look at the book, and we'll dig into that in a second as well. But those books that actually had a different price point, if it was a newsstand edition, it would be labeled by CGC as such. But they never did that for books that had the same price. Well, that's changing. As of September 26th, they are going to now label every newsstand edition as a newsstand edition. And here's an example of the new casing style. So again, Amazing Spider-Man number 252, this book had the same price for whether it was a direct or the newsstand, and it was never labeled. But now, as you can see up here, right on the center, it'll say newsstand edition. So that's kind of a nice change, that they're recognizing that newsstand editions in general are more highly coveted, because they just in general, people who bought newsstand editions, they bought them as reader copies, right? They just looked at them, they read through them, and either threw them away, or they were pretty beat up by the time people were done reading them or rereading them. And so it's really tough to get a high-grade newsstand edition for some of these, especially 1980s and 1990s books. So CGC has said we're going to start labeling them as such. And so what's the difference between a newsstand and a direct edition? Well, I'm going to put a link to this article that CGC posted in the video description for this video, so you guys can read through it, because it's some good information in here. But the short answer is that you got a couple of different options for how they denote that when you look at a book. And a newsstand edition typically has the UPC code, just like you'd see on the back of like the vintage collection figures. And if it's a direct edition, they strike through it like you see here. Or they use an art box. So this would be the newsstand, and then the direct editions would have an art box with Spider-Man's head. And you see that all through some of the vintage original run Star Wars books, where, I don't know where exactly they started, but the early books were all newsstand. Well, as the Marvel run kind of progressed, direct editions became more and more popular. So you started to see this Spider-Man head, and that lets you know that you're holding in your hands a direct edition versus one that has the UPC code, which is the newsstand edition. And by the mid-1990s, both versions were printed with a UPC code, but one of them has direct edition written inside that box, and one of them does not. And oftentimes, some of them have direct edition written on the side instead of inside the box. So there's all kinds of different variations, and you have to be careful to know what you're selling. And I talked about this on the channel, that I picked up a Shadows of the Empire #1 that the seller did not know it was a newsstand edition. And I got it for the price of a direct edition. And it's a 1990-something book, 1995, somewhere in there. And it's very, very tough to find 1990s books with newsstand editions. So I was very lucky in that respect, that the market didn't recognize it was an auction, and the market didn't recognize that it was a newsstand. The seller didn't note it was a newsstand in the auction title. And so I was very lucky in that respect. But now moving forward, CGC is going to denote that on the label. And if you have an old copy of a newsstand that has the older style label, you can send it in for reholdering now. And, it costs like 25 bucks or so. And then you would hit a drop down menu and type in, I'm reholdering a newsstand edition. And that lets CGC know that this reholder that you're submitting to get recased should be relabeled at the top that we just saw with newsstand on there. So pretty interesting news. I just thought I'd share that. The other bit of news that I wanted to share, and this was courtesy of Carlo, who is a subscriber, is that CGC's headquarters in Sarasota, Florida is right in the path of this hurricane. So if you guys sent in items to CGC to be graded, just be aware that your submissions could be a little bit delayed. They've been running about 35 days or less. My last CGC batch took 12 days door to door. You can expect that to be delayed because of the hurricane conditions that South Florida is experiencing right now. And to everyone who lives there, like Carlo, please be safe. I hope that you guys will take precautions that are necessary and that you guys stay safe down there in Florida who are watching this video. Now let's parlay that into a look at some recent sales for CGC graded comics. And I did not pick only 9.8 graded comics. I picked a wide range. We're going to start with where it all started for Star Wars, the 1977 Star Wars issue number 1. Going back to what we talked about, all of the early books in the Marvel run for Star Wars comics, the original run, they were all newsstands, and you can see the UPC code here on the front of that book. Every book for some of those early books were all newsstands, and so this was a CGC 9.4 grade, and it sold in an auction on September 25th for $510 plus $18 shipping. So that's what a 9.4 grade sells for. Here's a 9.6 grade. This one looked to be a little bit cleaner copy. The 9.4 grade had a little bit of an overwrap, as you can see. You can see the white edge. That's from the back being overwrapped onto the front, and that does happen a lot with some of these 80s and 90s books. This one, as you can see, is much more clean. It's much more kind of perfectly centered. And it was a 9.6, but it did have off-white to white pages instead of white pages. So it's kind of a rung down in terms of the page quality. But it was a 9.6, and that sold at auction as well on the same day for $898.88 plus shipping. So that gives you kind of a rough price idea. It's not apples to apples because the 9.4 grade was white pages. The 9.6 grade was off-white to white pages, but it still sold for about $300 more. Here's a 9.8 grade with white pages. So this is about as good as it gets for a Star Wars number 1. Absolutely gorgeous copy. And that one sold for 7,000 Canadian dollars, best offer accepted. And I looked it up on 130 point, and it ended up being about $4,000 is what the sales price was on that one. So just interesting to see another Star Wars number 1 in a 9.8 grade sale and how far they have fallen. That's kind of be the theme of this kind of price guide for Star Wars comics, is that like the rest of the comic book market, prices have come way down. Some of these books that are key issue books that were selling 6 to 9 months ago for X amount, nowadays they're selling for X amount minus 30 to 50%. It just depends on the book and how popular it is. But Star Wars number 1 in a CGC 9.8, it hit close to $6,000, if not above that, for a little while there. And now you're paying closer to $4,000. So it's a pretty big price drop. But let's call it about 40%. Here's another good one that I really like. This is Star Wars number 8, and again, this one also was still available only in the newsstands. I think that they were newsstands up until kind of like the teens. After that, it kind of hit back into the 1981, 1982 time frame, and maybe in the 1980s where you started to see more direct copies. But this Star Wars number 8 is the first appearance of Jackson Rabbit. Great copy, great cover with Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Jackson on the cover. That one sold for $510. That's actually held pretty well. That price point has held up pretty well. It got up to about maybe $600 to $650, but it hasn't come down too far, even though the rest of the market has come down a little bit. So $510, that again closed on September 25th, so a nice recent sale, and that wasn't an auction as well. But, I've seen as low as $450 for this book, but $500 to $510 is probably a little bit more in line with where the market is. And it has not dropped nearly as much as some of the other books that we've looked at. I also got a few sales for different grades for Star Wars number 42, the first appearance of Boba Fett, as well as the first full appearance of Yoda. Great cover, timeless cover. In a 9.0 grade with white pages, that sold for $299. So again, this is something we've talked about. If a 9.8 grade is just way too expensive for you, look at maybe some of the lower graded copies of key issue books to kind of fit your budget. So that's a good data point there that sold here recently. And then on the other end of the spectrum is this one. This is a 9.8 with white pages, a beautiful example of the same book. This is the direct edition. So you can see here, this has got the Spider-Man box art there in the lower left-hand corner. This one was also the direct edition. But anyway, this one sold in an auction on September 15th, 13 bids. The final sales price was $17.25. Now, you go back to January of this year during the height of the Book of Boba Fett, this book was selling closer to $2,500 or more. In a newsstand edition, this was going for $3,500. So that just shows you how much the price has dropped. It's gone from roughly about $2,500. Now it's all the way down to below $2,000. And I think if this is a book that you're interested in, now's a pretty good time to get it. $1,500 to $1,750, let's call it. That's a pretty decent price range for a book that has really come back down in price. Next up, we've got Star Wars number 68. This is kind of the first mention of the Mandalorian in comics, the Mandalorians as a world. It's also the origin story of Boba Fett. This is the newsstand edition. And as you can see here, it's not labeled as such. Now, let's say you own this book, and this is a CGC 9.4 grade. You could send this back in for reholdering with CGC, as we just talked about. And then when you get it back, it would say newsstand edition right above the number there, the confirmation number on that label. So as you can see, it's got the barcode there. So this is a great book, a very desirable book, and it's in a 9.4 grade. This sold for $350 plus $10 shipping. Here is a Star Wars number 40, and again, this is a newsstand edition. So, some of these later books in the run, they're much more expensive in a newsstand versus the direct edition. And this is the first mention of Rogue One, and it's got a great cover with Luke Skywalker after he crashed his snow speeder. So this is like the Battle of Hoth, and it shows the AT-AT Walker. Just an awesome cover, and the very, very desirable newsstand edition for a 1980s book. It's just really tough to find these in the 1980s and especially in the 1990s. This one sold for $400 on September 25th on 40 bids. And, in a direct edition, this is probably closer to $200 to $250. So the rule of thumb generally is if it's a newsstand edition, double the price of what the same grade it would be for a direct edition. I don't know if that necessarily holds up anymore, just because the comic book market is in such a state of flux price-wise. But $400 is a pretty high number for Star Wars number 40. It's kind of a secondary key, and in general, secondary keys are not holding up very well in this market environment. The primaries, the key issues like Star Wars 1, Star Wars 42, Star Wars 68, those are holding up fairly well, as we just looked at, but those prices as well have come back down. So a little surprised that this one sold as high as it did, but just another data point for some of these secondary keys in a newsstand edition. Next up, another book that you think would be a lot hotter right now, just given that the Andor series is out and has gotten rave reviews. I am a huge fan of Andor so far. I've watched all 3 episodes. The first 2, while slow, they were very well acted. The character development is way better than the average Star Wars show. In my opinion, it blows Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett out of the water. The character development, the dialogue is snappy. I mean, just some of the scenes between some of the Imperial officers and the Security Bureau chief, along with his underling, the underling with his kind of team that they were leading in, and spoiler alert, where they go to kind of try and capture Andor. I mean, just some of those dialogue scenes were just incredible. Very well written, very well acted. I'm a huge fan. And then obviously episode 3 had a lot more action and was very well done. So I'm hopeful for the rest of the series. I'm filming this before episode 4 drops, so we'll see how good it is moving forward. But I just think that they have gone back to what Star Wars fans want, and that's gritty realism. It almost doesn't feel like a Star Wars show in some respects, and it's just really well done. So you think that Rogue One adaptation number 1, which is the first comic book appearance of Cassian Andor, Saw Gerrera, and Jyn Erso, K2SO. You think this book would be on fire right now, but because the comic book market is down, it's not. In a CGC 9.8, this one sold for $109.99 plus $12.75 shipping. That is a steal of a deal. These were going for $200 to $250. I think I paid about $200 for mine, maybe a little under that, $185, somewhere in there. So it's even come way down. It's about 50% off of those highs. Now, it's a modern book. So there's, in the cover A, it's very easily available. There's lots of them in the census, and that's probably what's held the price down. Here's another one that's the exact same book that sold in an auction for $104.50 on September 26th. So it just shows you that the comic book market is not reacting like it has in the past, where when a new series drops, the key issue that's associated with that new series, where it used to spike and really jump up in price, it's not doing that anymore. And it goes back to what my subscriber Q&A thesis was, is that people have FOMO fatigue. There's just too much new content out there that people cannot keep up, and they can't collect everything. And you combine that with the general bad economy right now, and with comic book prices really taking a dip. If you're a key comic book collector for Star Wars books, like this Rogue One adaptation, you cannot beat $104.50 plus $20 shipping. So let's call it about $125 to $135 for Rogue One adaptation number 1, the cover A. You're going to be paying more for the 1 in 10 and the 1 in 15 and the Walmart variants. But for this cover A, for let's call it $125, that is a great deal. Congratulations, whoever got that one. Kanan the Last Padawan number 1 is another example of that. This is the first cameo appearance of the Rebels team. A lot of the actors have already been confirmed who are the Rebels. You got Sabine Wren confirmed. You've got Ezra Bridger confirmed. Era Syndulla is heavily rumored. I'm sure that Zeb Aurelius and Chopper are going to show up in the new Ahsoka series. So you think this book will be taking off? It's not. This one just sold for $193.50 on September 26th on 25 bids. $193.50 plus $18 shipping. This book was going very steadily for $300 to $350 for the last 6 or 9 months. Now it's going for $200 to $225. So great time to be picking some of these key issues up, especially the modern keys where there's a lot of them on the census. And I think sellers are starting to panic. They realize that this is not the same comic book environment that we've had 6 to 9 months ago, or even into last year and into 2020. It's just a totally different environment. Same thing with Heir to the Empire number 1. This is Grand Admiral Thrawn's first comic book appearance. This was a CGC 9.2 grade, so a little bit lower grade. That sold for $122.50, which is a fantastic deal for a lower grade key issue book. This is just an awesome cover, a timeless cover, and a great time, especially if you like some of these lower grades, 9.2, 9.4, even into 9.6s. You can get some great deals right now. On the other end of the spectrum is a 9.8 grade for the same book. This was the direct edition. This sold for $1,200. This one just sold here recently. And, this book kind of hit a peak of about $1,600 to $1,800. Now it's going for about $1,200. So, again, if you got deeper pockets and you want this in a 9.8 grade, now's a pretty good time to get it. And I fully expect Thrawn to be an awesome hit once he hits the new Ahsoka series. I'm really excited about the Ahsoka series. I hope it's as good as Andor has been. But that gives you another data point there for those of you looking for that book in a 9.8 grade. Likewise, Knights of the Old Republic number 9, the first appearance of Revan in comics. This one sold for $700 plus $15 shipping. This one was going for $900 to $1,100 very regularly, less than 3 months ago. So, again, this is one of those covers that I think, whether you're speculating on Revan coming out in Disney Plus content or not, this cover is one of the best from the Dark Horse run of Star Wars comics. It kind of shows the conflict going on within Revan as he kind of veers between the dark side and the light side. All of that was covered in the video game for Knights of the Old Republic, as well as in the follow-up novel. I just love this cover. I have it in my collection, and this is almost the exact same price I paid for this book a year ago. So it had a massive run up. It went from from $700-ish to what I paid to about $900, and then it hit $1,150, and now it's back down to $700. So now's a pretty good time to pick up Knights of the Old Republic number 9. Same thing with Darth Vader number 3, the first appearance of Dr. Aphra and her 2 droids. This is just an awesome cover. a modern kind of key issue, and it's selling anywhere from $275 to $300 right now, maybe as high as $325. This book, I still think, has a lot of potential to go up in value. I beat this to a dead horse, so I'm not going to cover it again. But Dr. Aphra is going to come to Disney Plus content. There's no doubt in my mind. And if you like Dr. Aphra, you like this comic book, now's a great time to get it. I just don't think you can beat that price. Maybe you even get lucky, and in an auction, it gets down to $250. But I think $300 is a good price to aim for right now. Just a great book. This one sold for $275 on September 24th in an auction, plus $16 shipping. So, after shipping expenses, that's about $290. Could it fall further? Could it fall back down to even as low as $250? Sure. There are so many of these books on the census. There's close to, I didn't look up what the census number was for Darth Vader number 3 in a 9.8 grade, but there are hundreds, if not 1,000 of them or more. And this is just the standard cover A. Obviously, the Laraka 1 in 25 variant is the only other cover difference for Darth Vader number 3. But I think this book is a great pickup if you're interested in it. Darth Vader number 3 in the this is in the third print, which is a lot less on the CGC 9.8 census, and the price reflects that. This sold for $475. I still think I've seen a few data points on Comic Link and elsewhere where it's sold for $430 to $455. That would be my price target if you're looking for this third print. The fourth print is even more expensive. That usually goes for $660 to $900. But the second print is another good cheap option. You can probably pick that up for $200 or thereabouts. So lots of different price points depending on which printing you're talking about. The first and second print are going to be your cheapest options. The third and fourth prints are going to be a little bit more expensive. And then obviously the 1 in 25 Laraka variant is going to be the most expensive. Next up is Dr. Aphra number 1, her first solo series. If you don't want to pay for her first appearance, again, we've talked about this at length, you can aim for this book, her first kind of solo series book. Make sure to get the 2017 volume 1 version. It's got Black Chrysantan and her 2 droids on the cover. It's an awesome book. This has been historically selling for about $175. Now it's selling for $120 plus $15 shipping. This sold on September 25th. 16 bids, $118.50 plus $14.95 shipping. So that's a great price point to aim for, and a lot more budget friendly in this kind of dicey market environment if you don't want to pay up for Darth Vader number 3. I want to talk about this book, The Mandalorian number 2, and I think this data point supports my thesis that The Mandalorian number 2 was a better buy. And I said this probably 3 or 4 months ago before even The Mandalorian issue number 1 was released. And I said, I'm telling you, get Mandalorian number 2 versus Mandalorian number 1, because Mandalorian number 2 is going to have less copies printed because there's going to be less speculators on it. It's the first full appearance of Grogu in comics. And this is the 1 in 50 Chung variant cover. And this is only a CGC 9.6. It's a brand new comic, and it's only a 9.6 grade, yet it still sold for $175 in an auction on September 25th. Now, will this price come down? Yes. I think that you'll be able to get this in a 9.8 grade for the same price or less if you give it another month or two. But at least this 9.6 sold in an auction for $175 plus $17.99 shipping. Now, if you compare that to the 1 in 50 ratio variant of Mandalorian number 1, you can pick that book up for under $150 right now. So it's proof that in a 9.6 grade, that Mandalorian number 2 is selling for more than what a 9.8 grade for the 1 in 50 ratio variant has sold for. Now, again, be patient on this book. I want to get this 1 in 50 Mandalorian number 2, but I want to get it in a 9.8 grade. I'm going to wait till probably November-ish, and then I'll probably pull the trigger in an auction. So just be patient, but I think 175 is an early data point, and it usually, the new comic book crowd, they're so anxious to get that book locked in that they overpay for it. I think that if you give it until November, you'll find that this book was an overpay, and you'll be able to get this for a 9.8 grade for 175 or less in a 9.8 instead of a 9.6 grade. Next up, I could not believe the sales price on this one. This is episode 1, The Phantom Menace number 3, the first cover appearance of Darth Maul, and this is the painted cover with the close-up. This has been historically selling very regularly for $300. This sold for $157.50. So about, and now it did have $22 shipping from Canada. So let's call it $175 or thereabouts, $180. But that's a great data point for a 9.8 grade book on this, because again, it had been selling for $300 historically. So you can knock off 40% of whatever your price expectations are right now, because the comic book market is just dead as a doornail. And if you got some money to play with, now's a great time to pick up some of these older keys. Finally, I wanted to talk about this one. I could not believe this final sales price. This is the first appearance of the Grand Inquisitor in Darth Vader #6. Again, we've seen the gamut. We've seen the price gamut for this book. Last year, it was selling for about $165 before we knew that he was going to be showing up in Obi-Wan. Once he showed up in the trailers for Obi-Wan, this book got up to like $650. Now you can pick it up for $125. So it's just amazing the price swings that we're seeing right now in some of these modern key Star Wars books. So to me, look, I don't really particularly care what the value is of the book. I just wanted to have it in my collection because I love the Grand Inquisitor. And look at this cover. I mean, come on. This cover is unbelievable. And to get this one for $125 plus $18 shipping, that was a slam dunk of a deal. And now's a great time to pick it up if you just want to have a buy and hold it for your collection for long term. Anyway, that's all I really had for this look at some of the CGC graded keys that are out there in the Star Wars world. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.